Good day, children, to all of you. Today we are beginning with the first chapter of Hornbill, the portrait of a lady. A portrait means the description of a person in words. So here, as you all must be having grandparents, in the same way the narrator also had a grandmother and he liked her very much. She was a close friend. From very beginning, she looked after him when her parents were in urban city. So here he is writing about his grandmother, and he says, "My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman." So like grandmothers are, they are old people. So his grandmother was also old. She had been old and wrinkled for 20 years that I had known her. And he said that for the past 20 years he had known her and she looked the same. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even a husband. But that was hard to believe, and for the narrator it was very hard to believe that she was young and pretty once and she had a husband. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. So grandfather's picture, it was there in the drawing room, and in the picture he was wearing a big turban, loose-fitting clothes, and he had a long white beard that covered his chest. He looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of a person who would have a wife or children, and from his appearance it seemed as he was 100 years old. And for the narrator, it was very difficult to believe that such kind of a person had a wife or children, and he thought that he must be having lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother, being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting, and for the narrator to understand, to believe that his grandmother was young and pretty once, it was very difficult to believe. She often told us of games she used to play as children, and she told him that when she was a child she used to play many games, and it all seemed very strange to him and as a fable. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. So her posture, she was short, fat and bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. And on her face there were wrinkles, crisscross. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her. And since he was looking at her, she was the same. So he believed that everything was similar. Old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. And she was old, it seemed to him as if she did not grow older, and she looked the same for the past 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. He said that she wasn't pretty, but she was beautiful. She hobbled about the house in spotless white sari, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other telling the beads of her rosary. And all the time she used to move about in the house from here and there. She wore spotless white sari as she was a widow, and one hand she placed on her waist to balance her, and the other hand she was carrying rosary, that is called the mala that the old people have in their hands, and they pray to God. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. And her silver locks, her white hair, it spread over her face, and her lips were always moving in the prayer. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. So you must have seen the snow-covered mountains. So in the same way, she looked like a mountain that was covered with snow. And she was quite peace. Her face showed peace and satisfaction. My grandmother and I were good friends. So from the very beginning, he lived with her. So they were very good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. And when his parents left him in the village with his grandmother and went to city, both of them lived together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. And early in the morning she used to wake him up and prepare him for the school. And while doing all these things, she used to sing song in praise of God by the time she bathed him and dressed him. And she thought that by listening to it, he will learn it. And the narrator, he listened because he loved her voice, but he never bothered to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot and a red pen, tie them all in a bundle and handed it to me. And at that time they used to write in slate, so she prepared her slate, chalk and pen, and she used to give it to him. After a breakfast of thick stale chapati with little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. And early morning she used to give him stale chapati. Stale chapati means the chapati that was cooked in the night and it was left, and the morning she used to put butter. At that time butter wasn't there, so it must be ghee and sugar on that, and then they went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs, and the other stale chapatis she carried for the dogs. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. And the grandmother, she always went because the school was in the temple arena only. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayer in chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading scripture, and the children, they used to sit in the veranda singing the alphabet and the prayers. And by that time, grandmother, she sat inside and read scriptures. When we both finished, we would walk back together, and after the school gave over, then they walked together home. This time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. And whenever they went home after the school, the village dogs would meet at the temple door and they would throw the chapatis to them, and those dogs, they growled and fought with each other. So this is the life of the narrator in the village.